Hello, everybody on my channel out there. Very excited today because I'm going to be chatting with an incredible jazz fusion guitarist from America, and a good mate of mine. We've played a few times together and we've hung out. So would you like to say hello to B.D.Lenz? Hi, BD, how are you?
Hey Andy, how are you, brother?
I'm good. Fine.
Good.
It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
We got together. When was it when we last played together?
We last played together last November. No. It was Easter.
It
We
was
did the
Easter, wasn't it?
festival
Yeah,
in
that was it.
Nashville.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love to get, I love to sit down and play with you, BD, because it's
Oh,
there's
likewise.
so much influences that you've got that are similar to me. You're into the jazz, you're into the fusion, into the rock, and I really want to talk about that. Talk about jazz fusion in this video if we can.
Yeah,
But since I've last seen you, you've released an album which I've been listening to all week in my car, really enjoying it, getting really deep into it. So
you.
tell us a little bit about this new album.
Sure. Well, this is my 13th album. So I've put a lot of different music out, but it's a real special album for me. First and foremost, because I have one of my absolute heroes on the record, and that is guitarist Mike Stern. Mike Stern was one of my earliest jazz influences, and definitely one of my biggest guitar, music, jazz, everything influences since. So for that reason, it's particularly special. But I have an amazing band on here. I actually started writing it over COVID, not with the intention of making an album. I was just working on stuff because I had time and nothing to do. Sending around to some of my buddies, hey, you want to play on my tunes? And again, this was just sort of experimenting, seeing what would happen. And as they started adding their parts to it, I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. This could be a record. So that's where it never had the intention of making it, but here we are.
Well, some of the best stuff's made like that, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
what I love about your stuff is that you're a full-on jazz guy and you've got the jazz chops, but you really are a rock guy. And sometimes when I hear people playing fusion, I know perhaps they're doing it because they think it's some commercial value, or they get dragged down to it. But with you, I can tell you're a rocker as much as you are a jazzer, same as me. I can tell that in the music.
Definitely.
And
Oh yeah.
also, you've got that little bit, there's a little bit in your compositions where I feel that the first thing I do is you always let the music fly. A lot of modern fusion guys, they rein the solos in, but on this new album, everyone's really playing. There's some incredibly flying solos. I'd love to know how you got that done. And there's also, you're bringing like contemporary sounds as well, and I find that that's a really interesting mix. And then having these two legends on, because it's not just Mike Stern on there, is there? There's
Yes, yeah, I shouldn't be
another
about,
god
yeah,
on there.
of course. The great Randy Brecker and you know, another one of my heroes.
Yeah. So it's that's really interesting the way you've brought these people onto the album, and it's really interesting. I because I can hear your influences in your compositions. I think sometimes that's quite conscious. I can hear definitely Mike Stern in there. I can hear Pat Metheny on this album more. I can hear Herbie Hancock as well as a composer.
Yeah,
Is that right?
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
In the way things shift and move. And what's interesting on the Mike Stern track, there's real Pat Metheny vibes on that track. So that was really interesting to hear that. And he's singing
True.
as well, isn't he?
Yeah, so it's funny because I had a guy singing on there, kind of like the Matheny thing.
Yeah.
And when I sent Mike Stern the track to do, I just expected a guitar track back, but he sent a guitar track and a vocal track, which I didn't expect. So he's not the only vocalist on there,
Yeah.
but he added another layer of vocals to it. And I was so excited. And he's like, yeah, it's just something I'm doing more, and it sounded great. So yeah, so he's guitar and vocals on my tune.
So a lot of the viewers from my channel, I know that they will be interested in what you're doing, because they gather around my channel because they like a certain type of music. They know what I like. and I like what you like, and I have mentioned you on the channel before, so I'm sure they'll be really interested in what you're doing. But even more so is to have these two legends, you know. So let's get into Mike Stern a bit, because I haven't talked about him that much on my channel. The one thing I have done is when I did my sort of top 10 favorite guitar solos, it was a toss up between two solos. One was Devil Take the Hindmost by Holdsworth, which is just, you know, but any Holdsworth solo you could put in there. But when I was very young, I bought The Man with the Horn by Miles Davis, and the opening track on there, Fat Time. What Mike Stern did on that blew me away, and it stayed with me all the way through, because Stern just seemed to have everything that I expected a jazz fusion guitarist to do, that I was searching for. He does it on that solo, and he's also playing outside, you know. And that was it for me, was right early on. God knows how old he was when he did that. But how about you? How did you come to Mike Stern as a player?
By the way, mentioning that solo, I totally agree. Totally, that whole thing just completely rocked my world, and I could talk more about that. But the way I sort of discovered him, when I went to music school, so right after high school, I went to a music school in Los Angeles called Musicians Institute. So I was 18, was not very familiar with jazz at all. You know, I grew up on, you know, progressive music, rock music, pop music. But obviously I was so into guitar and virtuosos. He came to school and played, and I remember, it's funny because the first time he played at our school, it kind of went over my head. I really didn't understand it. I knew it was awesome and cool, but I couldn't make sense out of it. And then, you know, it encouraged me to kind of go deeper in his catalog. I found some records of his, started listening, started making sense to me. And again, I credit him for myself as being the bridge from rock to jazz, because he does it both so amazingly. Like, he puts it together so well. So as you noted earlier, I mean, I grew up a rocker. He was my bridge into the jazz world because he had both. And then, you know, once I discovered his music, I just fell in love with his writing as well as his playing, which is always just so fluid and virtuosic, and love it, you know.
Yeah, so before we get onto the whole fusion thing, I think this would be a really interesting to talk about, is actually jazz fusion, and why do that, not straight jazz, and why not rock, you know. But I always find this really interesting. What were the rock bands? What were you listening to before, you know, you got into fusion and jazz, and what was the sort of route through those bands? Because there's often key rock players that get you there, aren't there?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, I grew up a huge Rush fan. Now, I'm not going to say I was a really big progressive rock fan necessarily, although I definitely dipped my toe in there, but I was a huge Rush fan. And in terms of guitar players, again, I was into virtuosity even then. Joe Satriani, Stevie Ray Vaughan, like really heavy blues. You know, and this is the late 80s, so the Steve Vai, Joe Satriani thing was real big back then. So again, coming from the rock virtuosity and the progressive aspect of it, you know, I think I just needed somebody to sort of bring me into the jazz world, you know, because ultimately, if you're continuing to search further, you know, you're going to go beyond the rock world. It's going to lead you to either jazz or classical, you know.
Yeah, I started off listening to it, new wave of British heavy metal, which is sort of Iron Maiden,
I
Angel
love
Witch,
Iron Maiden too.
you
Yeah.
know, all those
Yeah.
sorts of bands, and it was Rush for me, but they were really important. Yes, and Rush, I'd say, but it was Rush first, because Rush still had the heavy metal riffs, you know.
Yeah.
But and I think it was that level of virtuosity. But did you ever come across people like Jeff Beck or?
I did. You know, there are guitar players, and for me, I mean, I'm just speaking personally, like I would put Jeff Beck in the category of, yes, I love his guitar playing. He's absolutely amazing, but I don't necessarily love his music. You know, I can't sit down and necessarily listen to an album of his personally. You know, I could watch him play and appreciate, you know, when he's improvising, but I don't necessarily love his music.
But I think with Jeff Beck, he has to latch on to composer, because he doesn't write.
Yeah.
He's like to me, he's like an incredible singer.
Yeah,
There's certain
right.
guitarists that are like this, where they can play a tune. Hank Marvin from the Shadows can do it. He's a guitarist that can do it. They can just play a tune, and that's what Beck's like. And he relies on the tunes. And for me, it was when he hooked up with Jan Hammer and all those guys in the 70s. That's
Who I've discovered through your channel, by the way. So thank
yeah,
you.
that was I bought Wired, and that was the album for me. So you listen to Rush, you go to college to study, and you got the blues thing, and you see Mike Stern. So what albums was it that you then
The
checked out?
one, yeah, the one that got me, it's called Time and Place, which has like the famous chromosome on it. And in listening to it now, I mean, it's a little dated. It's got the 80s vibe because it's got some synth bass and stuff. But I mean, the playing on there, the guitar playing is and the writing, I have to say, like, one big thing, if I can go off on a little tangent
Yeah,
here, one big thing for me is not just being a great player, great musician. And by the way, I've heard you talk about this, and I love when you talk about this because I know we're totally in agreement about this. It's not virtuosity for virtuosity's sake. It's using virtuosity to propel a tune or a composition, which is really what's going to speak to people. And I really work hard to write tunes, not just be a blazing guitar player. So again, with him, it wasn't just his playing, which is jaw-dropping. It's his great tunes his melodies and stuff. It's the whole, for me, it was the whole package.
I always felt that there was a lot of fusion guitarists in the 70s. They were very influential, but when you got to the 80s, John Scofield and Mike Stern, they pioneered a way of truly getting exactly in the middle of rock guitar and jazz guitar. Because I think what happened in the 70s is that a lot of the guitarists were trying to copy Hendrix. So you got these fusion guys, but they're not really using the vocabulary of jazz. They're,
Right.
they're, they're, they're using their jazz virtuosity just to burn and play fast. I think of someone like Al Di
Mhm.
Meola or Larry Coryell or John McLaughlin. Um, when I heard, and especially Mike Stern, and I don't think he gets the credit. When I heard him, he'd heard him in Miles Band, which is where I heard him first. He was, it's the notes. There's like bebop notes, but there's an equal amount of really screaming, bendy Hendrix. He just gets that
Yeah.
balance just so right. And I don't know where he came from to have got that so right. I never heard anybody get it. And then the album you're talking about with Chromosome, I think he sets the blueprint for so much jazz fusion since then. It's almost become a cliche, that bebop, the heavy rock
Yep.
groove, the screaming guitaring, but those bebop lines that you hear on
Yeah.
Chromosome, it's almost like a game changer, I think, that track.
Yeah. Yeah. And I totally agree. I think he's one of the earlier jazz fusion guitar players who really had that bebop vocabulary more than most. I think you're right. I mean, he's really studied. And you can hear Coltrane all
Yeah.
over his lines. And again, it's another thing, like he just blazes over these changes, whereas a lot of the earlier jazz fusion were just vamps, like on a minor chord for 5 minutes. And it's cool. I love it, but he could play changes like really deep.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's the thing I heard. I think he's a true pioneer there. And I feel that for people who want to check Mike Stern out, an album that you have to listen to is the We Want Miles live album.
Yes.
That it's just playing, it's somewhere else. It's just incredible stuff
Yeah.
on there.
Funny because early in my band, when I started playing this music, we used to play the song Jean Pierre, which is on that record, We Want Miles, which is it's just a big vamp,
Yeah.
beginning of that. But again, like what he does with it is so cool and interesting and blazing, and again, that perfect mix of bebop lines with Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah. So how did you hook up with him to have him on your album? How did that happen?
So, I actually took a lesson with him, I want to say 25 years ago, when I was just getting started. And I want to say, like, I want to say 25, 30 years, he's had like a steady gig at this place called the 55 Bar in New York City. when he was in town. So when he's in town, he would play like 2 nights a week at this dive bar. And he really put it on the map. And I used to go see him play there all the time, like back in the day. And this is in the 90s. I mean, it was a pilgrimage. I would go all the time, and I talked to him afterward, totally fanboying him, And but the funny thing was, I started playing there myself. And I remember somebody came up to me sometime after a gig, and they said to me, "Hey, man, I love that Mike Stern thing you do." And he totally meant it as a compliment. But I didn't take it that way. I actually was like, you know what? I'm starting to sound like I'm trying to be Mike Stern, and that's not who I want to be. I love Mike Stern. He's one of my heroes, but I need to find myself, So I actually put all his records away, stopped seeing him for a long time, moved on to some other people. And then years later, kind of dug it back out again. And I'm like, man, I still love this stuff, So anyway, over COVID, he wasn't touring, and he was advertising that he was teaching. So I took advantage of that. I went and started seeing him again, taking lessons with him, just like, once every couple months. And he's just such a sweet guy, so encouraging. And even if I didn't necessarily learn anything in the lesson with him, I'm sitting and jamming with one of my heroes, so, but having seen him a few times, we got friendly again. And then one time I just came in, I'm like, "Hey man, would you play on my record?" I mean, I didn't know what he would say. What does a guy like that say? And he's like, "Oh, I'd love to." I was like, "Really? Oh my God." So that's kind of how it came together. I've been studying with him privately for the past couple years, on and off.
And what sort of stuff do you do with him in these lessons? Is it like theoretical stuff, or is it more
Yeah, I mean,
esoteric, artistic gigs type of stuff?
so coincidentally, we actually both studied with the same guy. So there's this piano player named Charlie Banakis, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's this legendary pianist teacher. He became more of a teacher later in his life, and everybody studied with this guy, including Mike Stern, for decades. I mean, Mike studied with this guy forever. And actually, I should mention early on, my first lesson with Mike Stern back in the 90s, he said to me at the time, he's like, "I'm going to give you this stuff, but really, I just got this from Charlie Banakis, and you really should probably want to just go to him," which I did. And I studied with Charlie Banakis for a couple of years through the mail. So in recent times when I've been studying with Mike, we've been kind of going over that Charlie Banakis stuff again. I've been bringing it out because it's so deep and so heavy. And then a lot of it is just like, let's play. I mean, I said to Mike, like, I'm not asking for anything in particular. I just want to play. And if I hear something like, I want to know what you did, I'm going to stop you and ask you what that was. And so there's a lot of that. Like, we're just playing together, and he'll be like, "Oh, I'm working on this right now." And he's real, like I said, he's really deep. Like um, there's so much theory in what he does, and he's so knowledgeable about scales and, different shapes. And I mean, he's a really, really, really intelligent player. It doesn't happen by accident what he does. He's really shed.
I get quite a few comments on the YouTube, but there's some serious jazz fans out there. But of course, they don't come up with through the sort of jazz training, that I've done somewhat, and you've done a way more than I have. And every now and then someone will say, "What do you mean by playing through the changes?" And it's amazing that people can love the music and they really get something from it, and that really that chimes with me, that people love this music. But the actual route to become a jazz player like you or Mike, is it's a long trek. Would you be able to sort of explain what that is, and what what
Yeah.
you were doing with Mike and Charlie Banakis, and the sort of
And by the way, I totally understand what you're talking about, because I mean, obviously the fusion world has even different subgenres, maybe, or different influences, I guess. Like, I know there's sort of the Holdsworth school. I know I watched the video of you and that guy who was really heavy into Holdsworth, and there's a group of guitarists who sound like Holdsworth or Metheny or Stern, and a lot, I think, again, a lot of people come to this music from the rock end of it, never really get deep into the jazz thing. And I understand that because again, I didn't grow up on jazz. But again, sort of trying to emulate my hero, Mike Stern, I had to. And to the point where, I mean, I became sort of a dedicated jazzer for a while and put away the distortion pedal, and just really, really worked hard on shedding standards. And I still do that now. So again, like the traditional jazz route was not where I started. And I'm not even going to say that thing is my first love, but I do love it. But I have, for me, I have to sort of put it together with the rock thing, which is still deep within me. But in the stuff that I do with Mike Stern, I mean, and the Charlie Banaka stuff, it's really deep about working with chord tones and weaving in and out. I mean, the coming up with those amazing lines, like Coltrane or whatever, like how he weaves and bobs throughout these chords. Again, it's not something that they do by accident. It's there's a science and a logic to it that I sort of had to come to understand. And that whole thing of, weaving through those changes, again, when you bring it to the rock end of it, or maybe like a, fusion thing where it's just very vampy, it still applies and you still use it.
So I don't know much about the Charlie Banacus method. Is I get the feeling it's sort of using neighbor tones and enclosing.
Yeah,
You basically start off with your basic chord tones, and then you will build in from a semitone above and then below, and then enclose and then down.
exactly. Yes. And he expands. I mean, again, he makes this a science out of it. And he gives you all these different possibilities and teaches in a way where it becomes sort of a science to do it. But it's so deep, and that's only part of it. A lot of other stuff he did was different arpeggio shapes. So for example, he'd like come up with this arpeggio. I mean, he'd give you a whole bunch of them, like maybe 1 3 5 9, right? And then you learn to apply that to like every single chord type there is. So you're arpeggiating this particular pattern through 15 chord types, including major 7 sharp 5, major 7 flat. I mean, everything. So that was another cool thing because it really helps you see where all these different alterations are and how to just take a shape and just change one little note of it to fit a specific chord.
It's a lifetime study. I am
It's a whole
I'm
life.
not a guitarist. I mean, I play a ton of guitar, but I'm a drummer, but even with that, before I got on the call with you, I still go back to the jazz standards. I try my best. I try to get through the chords, get inside the chords. Sometimes I'll just try and go through a jazz standard in my own speed. So I'll go right. So with C major 7, I'll play through that right and try and get there. I really believe that if you do it a lot or a little, however much you do that type of study, there's a huge benefit. I did a very small amount of that sort of enclosing stuff. Just at one point, I thought, well, let's just take a minor chord and enclose it, see what I get. And some of my trademark licks have come from that. It's and I think, have you got any advice for musicians who are like rock musicians or prog musicians who want to go towards jazz? How would you do that, in
Yeah.
your own playing?
And again, even if you don't want to become a quote unquote jazz musician, like just that knowledge is so I mean, I play rock stuff all the time, but that knowledge that I've learned from doing the jazz thing still applies. So again, you don't have to be a jazzer, but I think that having that deep knowledge helps you in everything. But I think the way to go about it really is start out with a couple simple standards, and there's some basic ones, All the Things You Are or Stella by Starlight or something. And really, step one is just try to arpeggiate through those. Um, you can even go like 1 3 5 7 through every chord. I mean, it'll sound very exercisey, but that's how you start. That's how you start learning the chords. And then once you become a little better with that, then you can sort of try different combinations of your arpeggio. So maybe 1, 7 3 5, but really just trying to connect them. And this, I make it sound like it's easy. It's not. This takes a really long time. But that's how you start getting the sounds of the chords themselves. And then as you get better, then you fill in the scales to sort of mix it up so it's not just arpeggios. And then once you get that, then you start doing the weaving thing, like I was talking about, Charlie Banacas thing. But really, if you can just start by arpeggiating through chord changes, that's already a great start.
It's hard though, isn't it?
Oh, dude. Yeah, again, I
think
make this sound easy. This is,
it is hard. There's something about the guitar, it's like you discover that rock pentatonic thing, and there's so much in there, and it's amazing as well, and then jump from that to just trying to do 1-3-5 through.
oh yeah.
The thing that
Totally.
helped me and is that I realized what I was doing wrong was trying to play all the jazz standards, and I'm a firm believer, just take one and spend a long time,
Well,
even if you have to work a solo out. So
oh
that
yeah.
so
And
that means you can turn up with it, because if you can play one jazz standard, you can play with some jazz guys, can't you? And
you
that's an
sure
amazing
can.
thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the thing is, like, you learn a couple standards. The thing about jazz is a lot of the same things happen over and over. So you learn a couple tunes and sort of get the hang of, the 2-5-1, or, it's just the things that seem to occur in a lot of standards. Like, you'll see these repetitions all the time. And once you learn it in one song, you can, usually apply it to another. I will say I also did a lot of transcribing too. I mean, transcribed a ton of Mike Stern and Pat Metheny and Coltrane and stuff. Just to see how do they do it? How do they connect these chords?
Oh, it's incredible. I never got that far. I take my hat off to you for doing that. It's a lifetime study, and I can hear it in your playing. And I've had the album on in the car up for about a couple of weeks, and it's really opening up. Each composition is really becoming its own little world. And I'm going, I hadn't heard that the first time, and I can see you exploring, really interesting ideas. And I do highly recommend it to everybody on the channel, to go and check it out. So, tell us about the title of it. Tell us a bit more about what's actually happening on there, and also tell us a bit about getting Randy Brecker on there, because that's a real legend, isn't it?
It is, and I don't mean to belittle him in any way, because he is another legend. Yeah, the record's called "It's Just a Dream," which is the name of the second track on the album. Um, where'd it come from? I don't know. It's always hard making titles for jazz tunes. I'm not the type, like, oh, I'm thinking about a car, I'm gonna write a song about a car. Like, I don't write that way. I write a tune and then try to just sort of imagine, what it makes me think of. So the title is not anything in particular, but as far as Randy Brecker goes, Randy had actually played on a record of mine about 10 years ago. So I used to be on a label about 10 to 15 years ago. I put out a few albums on this label. And when somebody else was paying my bills, they hired Randy Brecker and some other famous people to play on one of my albums. So I got to meet him at that time. And actually, one time, coincidentally, we ended up on a festival together. He was after my band. And the last tune of ours, I remember he came out and played with us. Again, this is huge because those people who don't know Randy Brecker, he's definitely one of the most recorded trumpet players around, not just
My
jazz.
my followers know Randy Brecker.
Yeah, you're right, of course.
I know they'll be in there every single album, every weird import. They will be going, "Hey, who didn't mention this, Andy? You didn't mention that." So, yeah, they'll know Randy Brecker.
All right, so don't message me. I'm sorry. I know you all know Randy Brecker. He is a legend, along with his brother who's passed away, Michael Brecker. And so anyway, I hadn't seen Randy in a while, but I just thought of this tune. I thought it'd be perfect on it, and I contacted him, and he remembered who I was, and he was, again, willing to do it, which makes me happy. And here we are.
And one of the things interesting with this is, so we just had the warning that we've got 10 minutes left of this. So I'll ask one more question. How are you and these guys surviving in the modern world? We've had COVID, we've got the internet. You said you used to have a label, and now labels don't seem to really mean that much anymore. You've brought a CD out, and are people still buying CDs? There's all, that our industry's changed.
It's
It's
definitely.
really hit jazz guys heavily. So how are you finding that, and how are you surviving?
So, I mean, you're right. Things have changed a lot. I've never made, a living off selling records, so this was not my bread and butter. But I've sold some records while on tour, like touring the UK and in Europe and stuff. I mean, people are still buying them to some degree. Interestingly enough, the way that I've actually made my money back on my records is through licensing it out for like television shows and stuff. So my music's literally been in hundreds of TV shows around the globe. Like some famous examples are like I had a tune in Breaking Bad. Uh, so many. There's hundreds of them. And I really made money back from doing that. And again, making records is not my bread and butter. It's at this point, it's just my love, So I mean, I'm still playing tons of gigs, and they're not all great, exciting jazz gigs. I mean, I still do wedding gigs and play with vocal duos or whatever. I mean, I'm just a working musician, and I write music for television specifically now, which brings in a little income. So for me, it's been like doing a little bit of everything, having my hand in a lot of things. But this is like what I love, this album and this music is, what I aspire to all the time.
Well, BD, I'm so pleased because we've known each other for a while now. We've played together. I'm so happy to have got you on my channel. I know I've spoken about you on the channel before, but I'm so happy to actually got you as an interview, and be able to. I know my lot will be checking you out and loving the stuff you're doing. When you're back over in the UK?
Yeah, so I'll be back by myself in April. I always come myself and play with local musicians, including yourself. And I really, really hope we get to play together. Every July or every summer, I bring my trio from home and we do about a month-long tour of the UK and some of Europe. So I'm working on that as we speak. And if I could really quickly while I have the time, I gotta say, Andy, I love your channel, dude. I've learned so much from it. Like you are so knowledgeable and your analysis of things is just spot on. I mean, I've learned so much from it. So thank you for it.
Well, I'll tell you what, BD, one of the big Achilles heels about my channel is I know I don't cover contemporary music, and the reason is because there's tons of it. Sometimes I think, should I go on Bandcamp and just search out jazz fusion, and there's tons of it, and I love it all. People think I'm anti it, and it's not that. So what I've decided is that the people in my orbit and the people I love that come in, these are the ones I want to champion on the channel. So I'm so happy to have got you on the channel, and because then there's a future as well, because you're coming over in April and hopefully we'll be able to do something. And I'd love to get you, we'll get together face to face and have a play and a chat. And I'd love to be able to try and do something like that on the channel. So it's been brilliant talking to you. Do you want to give some links for people, websites or where they can find you?
Sure. I'm very easy to find. My name is B.D.Lenz. So everything is, /B.D.Lenz at B.D.Lenz, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, whatever you do, you'll find me. Bandcamp.
Yeah, and, check this guy out, everybody. He's an incredible guitar player, and I tell you, you've kicked it up on this new album. You're blazing on it, blazing.
Thank you.
I'm really, because there's some real. I haven't heard you play like that before. You really kicked it right up to some blazing stuff. That's all I want out of a fusion. That's all I want from a fusion album is for people to play. That's all I want. Okay then, BD, I will stop recording now. Everyone, if you like this video, like it, go and check out BD's stuff. If you want to see more, subscribe. And if you want to support me, get over to Patreon and all that stuff that I always say. And I'll see you all soon. Thanks for watching.